Hello, church. For this video, I'll be continuing chapter 2 in the book of Judges. And if you remember in the last video, I talked about how chapter 2 serves as sort of a second introduction to the entire book of Judges. We learned about, Joshua's death and how during that time is when God's people were obedient. And then we saw how in the next generation, the following generation, they fell away and did what was evil in God's sight. And then we also saw the repeated cycle that we're going to continue to see all throughout Judges. And so for today's video, I just wanted to review again verses 16 to 19, which is actually that repeated cycle. But I'm not going to really be talking about that. What I'm really going to be focused on is idol worship. And so verses 16 to 19 says this. Then the Lord raised up judges who saved them out of the hand of those who plundered them. Yet they did not listen to their judges, for they whored after other gods and bowed down to them. They soon turned aside from the way in which their fathers had walked, who had obeyed the commandments of the Lord, and they did not do so. Whenever the Lord raised up judges for them, the Lord was with the judge, and he saved them from the hand of their enemies all the days of the judge. For the Lord was moved to pity by their groaning, because of those who afflicted and oppressed them. But whenever the judge died, they turned back and were more corrupt than their fathers, going after other gods, serving them and bowing down to them. They did not drop any of their practices or their stubborn ways. So what was the evil that they did in God's sight? They turned to idols. Instead of turning to God and worshiping him, they turned to serve idols, specifically the Baals and the Ashtaroth. So the Baals, this was not just one false god, but many. There were several that had various manifestations. So the Israelites are abandoning the Lord and depending on these false gods in the way they should have depended upon the one true God. They bow their faces in fear to these idols. And the Ashtaroth, this was the goddess of fertility and of war. The Israelites worshiped them for procreation and for victory in war. Now, if we look at verse 17, what does God see when we turn to worship idols, when his people turn to worship idols? And in verse 17, it says, they did not listen to the judges, for they whored after other gods and bowed down to them. Other translations say that they prostituted themselves. And of course, this is very graphic language, and it's on purpose. Prostitutes are those who are desperate, who give themselves over without getting any real love in return. What's being said here is that when we serve an idol, we are entering into a relationship with this idol that uses us and doesn't care about us. We become a slave to the idol. So here, God sees Israel, his people, and us as prostitutes when we turn to serve idols instead of him. And so what were the people of God supposed to do instead? They were supposed to listen to the judge. The judge was sent there for their own salvation by God. And it says here in verse 17 that they didn't listen to the judge. They turned away from him. And so both the judge and these false gods offer a sort of ruler slash savior type role for his people. So salvation was going to come either from the judge or from the false god. If you look at the judge, salvation from the judge comes from the grace and compassion of God. And again, God sent this judge despite the unfaithfulness of his people. Now, for the false god, there isn't any indication in the text that the false gods were compassionate or long-suffering or patient or faithful to these people. These false gods, they don't offer grace or forgiveness. Now, if you look at verse 19, but whenever the judge died, they turned back and were more corrupt than their fathers, going after other gods, serving them and bowing down to them. They did not drop any of their practices or their stubborn ways. So listen closely again. It's not that they just turned from one god to just another alternative. No, it says here that they turned back and were more corrupt than their fathers, going after other gods. They turned to serve the Baals and the Ashtaroth. So they turned to serve more than one false god. So idols, they always come in plural. It's never just one, right? Like John Calvin says that the heart is a factory of idols that just keep coming up with more and more and more. It'll never be just one thing that you turn to. It'll be several things. Like here in God's people, they turn to serve the false gods that they were surrounded by. And the Lord, He's not going to brush off our idolatry as some kind of innocent ignorance. No, He sees idol worship as unrighteousness. So now let's look at our own world as it is right now. So for the world, they depend as their for their source of joy, happiness, value, provision on other things, right? More than one thing. And so we should see that as idols, because for us, the Lord is our ultimate source of joy, peace, happiness, provision, and salvation. And now let's look at our own hearts, the things that we do. If getting likes on social media drives you, then maybe that can be an idol in your life. And work is a good thing. It glorifies God when we do really well on our jobs. But if all you do is work, then maybe that is your idol. Another one is exercising. Exercising is a good thing. I enjoy it too. But if all you do is exercise, maybe that is your idol as well. And another idol that we really don't talk about much, and it's one that I had to really think about, and it's the need to please others at work to keep your job. This can be dangerous because it's stopping us from sharing the gospel and from others knowing that we are followers of Christ. In other words, idolatry is very subtle. It's very sneaky. You just never know what you might be turning to instead of God. So what can we do? Examine your heart. Ask the Lord to reveal any idol that you are turning to instead of Him. So I ask you to honestly look at different areas of your life: family, careers, possession, time, and truly ask yourself, am I willing to do whatever God says about in this area? Am I willing to accept whatever God sends in this area? And if you answer no to any of these questions, then maybe that is an area in your life that you've that you've given over to an idol instead of under the Lordship of Christ. And that's all I have for today, and thank you so much for listening, and see you next time.